These are time-bound legislations. You can see the hemorrhage in the House is quite high, and we need to put the question when we have quorum, and these bills must be ascended to on or before Friday next week. All right? Allow me to recognize the following schools before Honorable Mbadi, and you restrict yourself to maximum 5 minutes. Nandarasi Secondary School, North Kinangop, Nyandarua. St. Catherine Gaturi Girls, Kiharu. Garden Estate Secondary School, Roysambu, Nairobi. On behalf of the House and my own behalf, I welcome the students and their teachers to the House of Parliament. Honorable Mbadi, 5 minutes. If you can do less, the better.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll do 5 minutes or less. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I want to agree that we have spoken about this matter for years now, that we need to move away from absolute numbers and anchor our debt to GDP. Why that is necessary is simply because to measure the country's economic growth, it is measured in terms of gross domestic product in net present value, or at times some people measure it in nominal terms. But Mr. Speaker, for you also to determine our ability to pay or repay our debts, then it should be anchored on economic growth, because it is from what the economic growth that will be able to meet our obligations. Mr. Speaker, and now I want to disclose that when this bill was first introduced on 6th of June by the Leader of Majority, Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah, on 8th, made a public pronouncement that the bill has been sneaked into the House at a time when we were very busy with finance bill and the budget estimate. And because the reason why I said so, and today I'm making that disclosure because from the contribution of the majority leader, then I think it would be fair to take back my words, because he has agreed that clause 6 has a problem. And that is the clause that really offended my conscience. Why? Because, Mr. Speaker, from the reading of it, it is clear that we would take away the power of Parliament in setting the debt ceiling or anchoring debt for that matter. And what really made me a bit unhappy was where there was a proposal that the Cabinet Secretary would just make a report to Parliament, not even seeking post facto approval, just making a report. But, Mr. Speaker, even as we move to GDP, we need to be clear as a country on how do we measure the GDP of this country. I think it is controversial, and if we are going to peg our debt to GDP, then we need to have harmony and agreement on the same. Mr. Speaker, I want to conclude by saying I agree with the committee that, and I'm happy that the committee has recommended that we delete clause 4, because really, when you talk about advice, what is the definition of advice? Mr. Speaker, we have been with you in this parliament, especially in the 10th parliament, where advice became such a serious matter of debate. What do you mean by advice and agreement? So we need to be clear, because once you give power to advice, the person given the power may now assume that his opinion or her opinion must be taken as given. And then that would bring controversy. Mr. Speaker, I want to be conscious of time and yield at this stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. My party chair has been very brief, and I would imagine the time he has left is donated to me, but I'll strictly stick to your requirements. Yes. Honorable Speaker, it has always been said debt is always cheaper than equity. We have always taught in our investment and appraisal classes that debt is never bad as long as the right leverage has been established. Honorable Speaker, when I perused this particular bill when it was published, like my party chair has said, I was extremely apprehensive. Apprehensive specifically on clause 6(2), where it gave unfettered powers to the Cabinet Secretary to spend beyond the limit and simply come to report to Parliament. That would have taken away power of Parliament donated by Article and the Constitution of Kenya, Article 203, or the section dealing with public finance. Honorable Speaker, I want to mention two things. It was also has been refreshing to listen to the leader of majority in whose name the act has been published. Honorable Speaker, I remember when I sat in the Committee of Delegated Legislation, the issue of the limit came to us twice. One, we approved, the other one, we were reluctant, and we had to revert what we were. Honorable Speaker, the proposal under Clause 6 seems to suggest that we leave away the limit, which in parlance means a nominal value, we go to a threshold. And for purposes of just to understand, threshold means the point of vulnerability, beyond which if you ever borrow beyond that point, it will be a breaking point and it will be an issue to do with the economy. Honorable Speaker, I also want to join my party chair on the issue of measuring GDP and the issue of determining the NPV. NPV means, Honorable Speaker, net present value. And my question that is going to disturb many people in this country, what is the discount rate are we going to use to determine the net present value at the time of setting the threshold? Secondly, how many years are we going to discount so that we arrive at the net present value? Those are the issues I hope when the Cabinet Secretary is making a report to Parliament will strictly disclose all those material facts. Honorable Speaker, of course the issue, how do we measure the GDP? In a third world country like Kenya, do we have adequate data to capture all the happenings in the economy? Where we have so many non-motorized supplies, where we have so many self-supplies that not go through the money market, or is not monitorized. Obviously, Honorable Speaker, that's where the danger looms. And it looms large, and it's going to be a disaster, a scandal in the next few years. Honorable Speaker, as I conclude, allow me to mention the issue of intergenerational burden. Honorable Speaker, when we are doing cost-benefit analysis, we always talk about willingness to pay and willingness to accept. Intergenerational burden must be spread between the generation. Many of the time when we borrow to invest in capital projects or public projects, they have a longer payback period beyond any single generation. And that's why the question that we must burden the current generation to pay all the debt incurred currently to build a facility or a public good going to last over 100 years has been a debate that we need to settle at one time or another. Honorable Speaker, as I conclude, the issue of public debt has been a debate, has been public debate, has been a political debate. We hope at one time or another we'll make it devoid of politics so that we focus on the future development of this country, because there's no single time we'll have the resources to develop, we'll have to borrow. On that matter, I support Honorable Speaker.
Kimani, I'll be happy if you take 3 minutes.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I will actually take much less than that.
Very good.
Honorable Speaker, I beg to support this particular bill of changing our debt to being nominal terms, to making it a percentage of GDP in present value terms. And I'd like to add probably a new reasoning to it. These nominal terms of having our debt limit to 10 trillion shillings, how does that compare to, say, somebody in the US? If an American investor wants to invest in our government securities and they check about our creditworthiness, the only information they get is that we have a debt ceiling of 10 trillion shillings and our current debt is 9.63 trillion. Remember, this person does not even have the advantage of knowing the strength of the Kenya shillings, and therefore this departure from making it not in nominal terms but a percentage of GDP in present value terms makes a global conversation about our creditworthiness without necessarily being privileged to what is the rate of Kenya shillings versus the dollar, what is 10 trillion shillings, and what is this ceiling about, Honorable Speaker. Most importantly, this puts very good pressure on the executive for this reason. For you to maintain this GDP at the proposed 55% plus 5, and whereas we are at 62, so there are only two options to reduce this 62% to 55 to 60%. You either reduce the borrowing or grow the GDP. So, and because we're not increasing borrowing, then you certainly have to grow the GDP. Now, this growth in GDP will actually mean that we are creating more jobs, that we are collecting more revenues, that we are collecting more taxes, and therefore, it is a step in the right direction to make sure that executive is put into check. Lastly, Honorable Speaker, we've seen a precedent before where money has been borrowed, and reference will be the Eurobond, and that money never got to get into this country. So if the debt increases without a consequent increase in GDP, it will be a very easy measure that that particular money that was borrowed was not spent in this economy and was not used to grow any particular sector in the country. Because if it were, then it would have led to the growth in GDP. And with that, I beg to support Honorable Speaker.
Lastly, I'll give to Farah Maalim for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for giving me. Mr. Speaker, this bill is very timely. But first of all, we need to have a provision for us to be able to do a forensic audit of all the money that was borrowed from the day we became independent in this country up to today, and find out how much of it is actually seriously gone into programs of infrastructure in the country or ended up in the pockets of people. Mr. Speaker, unless there are consequences for people who steal from this country, whether it is a debt or it is through the local, the local resources, then of course this thing is going to be always there. The other thing I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, is that most of it was borrowed. We need this forensic audit, both project-wise and financial-wise, for us to know where every coin went. The second thing, it was used a lot of it for infrastructural development in the rest of in Kenya. That's ostensibly the case. We have not had that much infrastructural development in the north. So we need a certain exemption for us to be able to get at least a road from Garissa all the way to Mandera, to Liboi, to Hulugo, to these places. And I think that is one area that I think we need there to be an exemption. If we have to borrow for this, then we'll have to borrow for this. So it's my very humble opinion that what was used before to show the busybodies out there was projects, infrastructural projects. And that has not gone very well in the past. Now, whatever has to come for infrastructural projects, I think we give it to the areas that have been marginalized historically. Now that the Equalization Fund, we're even sharing it with everybody else, including the areas that were benefited through the sessional paper number 10 of 1965. So there has got to be certain equity and equality and fairness in the manner in which you use some of these debts. Thank you.
Mover. Honorable Member, you heard my direction very clearly, so please spare me the...
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. And in reply, let me thank the members who have contributed to this debate and agree with many of the sentiments that I have said, including what has just been said by our former Deputy Speaker on the session of paper number 10 of 1965. And it is indeed true that resources were geared towards the most productive areas. And also true that a lot of the infrastructure that has been financed has not been equitably distributed around the country, and that is why, as a House, we have a big and huge responsibility to ensure that public debt, because it's being carried by all of us as Kenyans, that whatever is financed using public debt is benefiting all Kenyans across the country, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, is also true what has been said, that we must take up our role in terms of ensuring, as we prepare our budgets, as we oversight our ministries, departments, and agencies of government, we ensure that there is actual fiscal consolidation, because the fiscal consolidation does not begin with the Budget and Appropriations Committee. It begins with our oversight of the ministries and departments of government that we're oversighting, to ensure that there is no wastage of public resources, so that whatever we save goes towards reducing our public deficit, our fiscal deficit, and consequently reduce on how much we ought to borrow to finance operations of government, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, let me not belabor that point and urge all of you to support and approve this committee's report and second reading of this bill. And as we have committed as a House and as a budget-making house, and also the house that has the only privatization and debt committee, because even the other house, Honorable Speaker, doesn't have a committee like this. Therefore, it's an onerous task that Makali Mulu and Shurie have in leading that committee to ensure that even the public debt we get goes towards what we have always said in our budget and appropriations committee reports, that it is debt that is going to financing specific projects. And this committee has that responsibility to ensure that debt goes to finance specific projects. And that's the beauty of doing multilateral and bilateral concessionary loans, because they come with such conditionalities that they must be project specific, unless Eurobond that is not project specific and goes into a pot where you can't tell what happened to the money and what it's being utilized for. With those many remarks, Honorable Speaker, I beg to reply.
Thank you, Majority Leader. I now put the question, which is that the Public Finance Management Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 16 of 2023, be now read the second time. As members of that opinion say aye. Aye. Those of the contrary opinion say nay. The ayes have it. Next order.
A bill for an act of parliament to amend the Public Finance Management Act and for connected purposes.
Thank you. Honorable Aladwa, I advise you to remain in the House. We have a few minutes for the next order. You just walked in and you're walking out already. Honorable members, we barely have quorum. I beg of you to hold on to your seats. The next order, I would want it to be prosecuted in no more than 20, 25 minutes. I'll invite the clerk to call it out. Have you?
Order number 9, special motion. Consideration of nominee for appointment as the Principal Secretary, State Department for Correctional Services.
George Murugara. Give the chair, Jaylak, the mic.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, allow me to move that, taking into consideration the findings of the Departmental Committee on Justice and Legal Affairs in its report on the vetting of a nominee for appointment as a Principal Secretary, State Department for Correctional Services, laid on the table of the House on Wednesday, 21st June 2023, and pursuant to the provisions of Article 155(3)(b) and of the Constitution and Section 8(1) of the Public Appointments Parliamentary Approval Act 2011, approves the appointment of Ms. Salome Wairimu Muhiambiako as Principal Secretary, State Department for Correctional Services. Mr. Speaker, the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee conducted the vetting exercise yesterday morning, and I'm grateful that you allowed us to do this, as very important other business of the court was of the House was going on, and we were actually able to master 12 of the members of the committee. We apologize that even when the quorum bell rang, we were continuing the vetting contrary to the standing orders, and Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah had to come and just bring us out of this so that we could give this House quorum. Honorable Speaker, I tabled a detailed report on what exactly we did, and the findings of the committee are that the nominee, who is Salome Wairimu Muhiambiako, qualifies to be the Principal Secretary for Correctional Services. The report is detailed, and I believe every member has read it, because in our observations, which is what we are required to do, suitability vetting is not an academic exercise. It's purely to interview and ascertain that a nominee qualifies. We were able to confirm that the procedure that was used to nominate the candidate complied with Article 155(3) of the Constitution. We were also able to confirm that the nominee met all the constitutional and the statutory requirements prescribed by the law when it comes to nomination to become a principal secretary. We were also able to confirm that Ms. Salome Wairimu Muhia-Biako, who is a senior advocate in this country and a senior partner in a law firm run by her and another partner, actually has the experience in developing and managing strategies vital for the running of the firm, and those strategies are similar to what is required to run correctional services as a principal secretary. We also confirmed that the nominee exhibited clear understanding of the current issues affecting the State Department of Correctional Services, the need to promote just and secure society, and the effective administration of justice as regards this particular department. Having considered this, we were convinced she's suitable. And the only message we have for her is that the previous principal secretary for correctional services, one Mary Muthoni Murioki, shoes were extremely big. She has to fit into this. She did exhibit zeal, passion, that she will move away from having prisons to correctional centers. And this was endearing to us. This is the reason why, having taken into consideration all the relevant factors, we, as Committee on Justice and Legal Affairs, recommends to this House that you actually approve the appointment of this lady, Salome Muhia-Biako, as the Principal Secretary, State Department of Correctional Services. With those remarks, I beg to move and request the indefatigable Member of Parliament for Dadaab, the Honorable Farah Maalim, to actually second. Thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker, the chairman, MP for Tharaka, put it very well. Actually, when I go into some of these vetting sessions, and I see how our ladies have the energy, the right ideas, the zeal, and the fact that they're talking from the hearts of Kenyans. This lady, when we gave her an opportunity for her to tell us what she thinks ails in that department and what she's going to do about, she talked for all of us who were there. As a matter of fact, for 20 minutes, none of us were talking, we were just listening to her. And it was just so good that we did not have a single question, very few questions, because she answered the questions that we're going to ask. And I think we need to get more women, more women in this country into positions of management of affairs of this country, and I'm talking from my heart. Mr. Speaker, our ladies, our girls, our women, let's give them, no wonder in most of the developed countries you see 60%, 70% of the people who run their parliaments and their affairs are actual women. So this lady will do wonders in my opinion. We will be there. The only thing I told her is that we want to see you walk the talk. And I'm sure she's going to walk the talk. Mr. Speaker, without belaboring and taking a lot of time, I want to call on this House to approve this lady, and she will do a fantastic job. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Farah. Honorable members, I propose the question, which is that, taking into consideration the findings of the Departmental Committee on Justice and Legal Affairs in its report on the vetting of a nominee for appointment as Principal Secretary, State Department for Correctional Services, laid on the table of the House on Wednesday, 21st June 2023, and pursuant to the provisions of Article 155(3)(b) of the Constitution and Section 8(1) of the Public Appointments Parliamentary Approval Act 2011, approves the appointment of Ms. Salome Wairimu Muhia-Biako as Principal Secretary, the State Department for Correctional Services. We put the question. I will now put the question, which is that, taking into consideration the findings of the Departmental Committee on Justice and Legal Affairs in its report on the vetting of a nominee for appointment as Principal Secretary, State Department for Correctional Services, laid on the table of the House on Wednesday, 21st June 2023, and pursuant to the provisions of Article 155 3B of the Constitution and Section 8(1) of the Public Appointments Parliamentary Approval Act 2011. Order, Majority Leader and your team. Order. This House approves the appointment of Ms. Salome Wairimu Muhia Biako as Principal Secretary, State Department for Correctional Services. As many as of that opinion say aye. Will those of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Actually, the person who laughed and disturbed the speaker was not the majority leader. He's one of the ladies that appear to be excited by the presence of the majority leader. Next order.
Order number 10, motion. Ratification of the amended Nairobi Convention and the Protocol for the Protection of Marine and Coastal Environment of the Western Indian Ocean from land-based sources and activities.
Departmental Committee on Environment, Forest and Mining, Honorable Gikaria. Is nowhere. I'll step it down. Next order. Yes, the Honorable Majority Leader.
Sorry, Speaker, on a point of order, just for information, I should have said this during the statement hour, that further to your request 2 weeks ago on NGCDF and GAF disbursement, the Cabinet Secretary, National Treasury, had asked me to inform the House that they have now fully disbursed GAF 100%. They have also further disbursed another 10 billion shillings out of the 19 billion shillings that was pending on NGCDF. Therefore, the balance of 9 billion shillings will be disbursed as he promised before the end of this financial year. And for the first time in the history of this House, at least since I joined, we are crossing over a new year, financial year, without any arrears in CDF, NGCDF. And also on county government funds, is only the month of June that all our county governments have not received money for, a figure of about 29 billion shillings that he's working on for the month of June. Therefore, even our governors back in our counties should have no excuse now not to offer services to members of the public, or indeed not to pay their workers, as I have seen around the country. All those amounts have been disbursed. For county governments, only the month of June is pending, and only 9 billion shillings out of the total of NGCDF. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Well done, Majority Leader. Order number 11. Clerk.
Order number 11, motion. Ratification of the Kigali Amendments on the Montreal Protocol on the substances that deplete the ozone layer.
Chairperson, Departmental Committee on Environment, Forest and Mining. Martha is stepped down. Who is there? Cameron, you have authority from your chair to move the motion? Record the apology. You are lucky this is a day that the mood is different. Where is your chair?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And because of this, I want to register the apology that you let us move on Tuesday next week.
Thank you, Martha. Step down. Order number 12.
Order number 12, motion. Ratification of the Bamako Convention on the ban of the importation into Africa and the control of transboundary movement and management of hazardous waste within Africa.
Cameron, is it the same situation? That is your committee?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. we still extend the need to present it next week. On Tuesday.
Thank you. Matter step down. Order number 13. It has not been called out yet, Majority Leader.
Order number 13, the Statute Law Miscellaneous Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 60 of 2022.
Majority Leader, are you in a position to move, or we give the Majority Leader the mic?
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, miscellaneous statute, it's quite a weighty matter that we cannot begin now, being 5 o'clock. I would rather step it down to sometime next week.
Thank you. Matter step down. It will be on the standing on the order paper of Tuesday. Next, order number 14.
Order number 14, motion. Report on the United Nations Convention Against Corruption and Global Parliamentarians Against Corruption meeting.
Who is the chair?
Honorable Speaker, the Honorable Shakil is the chair, and he had indicated he was out of town, and he was not expecting it to us to get to that particular order this evening, so we could also step it down to sometime next week.
So, matter step down. I direct the clerk that business appearing at order number 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14 appear on the order paper of Tuesday next week. Order, honorable members, could you be upstanding? Having exhausted the business on the order paper by default, the House stands adjourned until Tuesday, the 27th of June, 2023 at 2:30 p.m.